Hi, good evening, scholars. Now that you're wrapping up your research proposal, it's time to put that plan into action. With your research, you are entering an academic conversation, joining researchers just like Elizabeth Wardle, Carrie Dirk, and Stuart Green in exploring how writing and rhetoric work in the real world by conducting primary research. But first, in order to understand the academic conversation you're joining, you'll also be conducting secondary research to learn what has been said and done before. This idea of creating a research space, remember that guy, John Swales, who Anne Johns cited in her article about discourse communities and communities of practice? In addition to developing the framing concept, discourse community, Swales also came up with what's called the CARS model of research, where he outlined the moves researchers make when writing the introductions to their articles. CARS, C-A-R-S, stands for Creating a Research Space, which is what researchers are doing in their introductions. They're creating a space for themselves to join the larger conversation about their inquiry. These moves would be considered genre conventions of introductions to research articles, so we're going to learn about them for two reasons. First, it will help you to navigate the long, scholarly articles you'll be finding and reading as part of your secondary research, and second, it will help you prepare for writing your own introduction to your research paper. As we learned from Johns and other authors, when you learn the genre conventions of the writing you're expected to do, you'll be a much more successful writer. So let's take a look at the CARS model. Swales shows us that research introductions usually have 3 moves and steps within those moves. I'm going to talk you through those moves and why they matter. Move 1, or the first thing researchers do when they're writing introductions, is to establish a territory. This means essentially to build the conversation. That means move 1 is all about secondary research. Now, the first step in move 1 is to claim centrality. As you'll see in the examples on the second page of the handout, claiming centrality is just letting your reader know that this line of inquiry matters and that people care about it. If you look at the first group of examples, the bold underlined phrases show that one way we can claim centrality is by quantity, saying that a lot of people have studied or care about this thing. And then, the next 2 groups show that we can claim centrality by discussing the importance or significance of the issue. The second step in move 1 is making topic generalizations. This is where, in a sentence or two, the researcher actually names the names in the conversation and what the conversation is and in general. To do this, you'd want to take a step back from all of the secondary research you've read and think about what they all have in common. There's more in common to their research findings, the more specific your topic generalization will be. But if there are a lot of different themes or disagreements among your sources, then it would be good to keep it more general. Step 3 of move 1 is where you get into the specifics of your secondary research. This is where you actually build the conversation, weaving together all of the voices of your secondary sources to give your reader a primer on the primary research done around the issue. This involves synthesizing or drawing connections between ideas from your sources, and we'll learn how to do that later in this unit. So to recap, Move 1 of the CARS model is all about your secondary research, and not yet about what you're going to do with your own research. That's because, as we learned from Stuart Green, you need to listen to the conversation before you can find a way to enter in it. That's when Move 2 comes in. Move 2 is called establishing a niche, or identifying where your research fits and why it is relevant. This is where you're making a claim that more research needs to be done. Swales says there are 4 ways you might enter into the conversation: by counterclaiming or using an opposing viewpoint to claim that more research needs to be done, by indicating a gap or noting that there is limited or absent research on your area of interest, by raising a question about the prior research from Move 1 that your research responds to, or by continuing a tradition, which means that you're building upon the prior research from Move 1. As you can see, whichever move you choose depends on what makes sense for the conversation you established in Move 1. If Move 2 is making the claim that more research needs to be done, then Move 3 is explaining how you're going to do it. This is where your research comes in. Step 1 of Move 3, I know this gets confusing, but bear with me. So Move 3, Step 1, involves either outlining the purposes of your research or what your research has accomplished, following by announcing the main findings of your research. This part is brief. You don't want to get into your whole analysis of your data or your developed conclusions, because those are going to be later in the paper, but you do want to give a reader an idea of what they'll be learning from your study so they can make the decision whether or not to read on. Finally, because research articles are usually long and complex, writers often indicate the structure of their paper to help the reader better navigate it and to give their reader some insight as to how their findings are valuable. It may not be obvious to you at this moment, but you cannot complete Move 3 until you have actually done all of your research, you've written up your findings, and completed that portion. You'll be revising the basic research question you started with in your research proposal and adjusting it to meet the data that you have to speak to now that you have conducted your primary research. It's done much later down the road, so it's kind of an effort in putting together the information after you know what you'll be talking about, because you're the one who's going to be answering the question, so you have to know what answers you have to give, right? Okay, so those are the CARS model moves of research introductions. Look out for them as you start reading your secondary sources to give you more context for the articles you're reading, and be prepared when it's your turn to write a research introduction. And please, take a look at all the pages of the CARS model handout. There's a lot of really helpful information on pages 2, 3, and 4 beyond what is on the first page. Thanks.